Carl Jung. Slowly, in the course of the 18th century, alchemy perished in its own obscurity. Its method of explanation, obscurum per obscurius, ignitum per ignotius obscure, by the more obscure, the unknown by the more unknown, was incompatible with the spirit of enlightenment and particularly with the dawning science of chemistry towards the end of the century. But these two new intellectual forces only gave the coup de grace to alchemy. Its inner decay had begun at least a century earlier, at the time of Jakob Bohm, when many alchemists deserted their alembics and melting pots and devoted themselves entirely to Hermetic philosophy. It was then that the chemist and the Hermetic philosopher parted company. Chemistry became natural science, whereas Hermetic philosophy lost the empirical ground from under its feet and aspired to bombastic allegories and inane speculations, which were kept alive only by memories of a better time. This was a time when the mind of the alchemist was still grappling with the problems of matter, when the exploring consciousness was confronted by the dark void of the unknown, in which figures and laws were dimly perceived and attributed to matter although they really belonged to the psyche. Everything unknown and empty is filled with psychological projection. It is as if the investigator's own psychic background were mirrored in the darkness. What he sees in matter, or thinks he can see, is chiefly the data of his own unconscious which he is projecting into it. In other words, he encounters in matter, as apparently belonging to it, certain qualities and potential meanings of whose psychic nature he is entirely unconscious. This is particularly true of classical alchemy, when empirical science and mystical philosophy were more or less undifferentiated. The process of fission which separated the
Φυσικά.
from the
Μυστικά.
set in at the end of the 16th century and produced a quite fantastic species of literature whose authors were, at least to some extent, conscious of the psychic nature of their alchemistical transmutations. On this aspect of alchemy, especially as regards its psychological significance, Herbert Silber's book Problems of Mysticism and its symbolism gives us abundant information. The fantastic symbolism bound up with it is graphically described in a paper by R. Bernoulli, and a detailed account of Hermetic philosophy is to be found in a study by J. E. Vola. But a comprehensive study of the ideas contained in the texts and of their history is still lacking, although we are indebted to Reitzenstein for important preparatory work in this field, the alchemical process and its stages. Alchemy, as is well known, describes a process of chemical transformation and gives numberless directions for its accomplishment. Although hardly two authors are of the same opinion regarding the exact course of the process and the sequence of its stages, the majority are agreed on the principal points at issue and have been so from the earliest times. Since the beginning of the Christian era. 4 stages are distinguished, characterized by the original colors mentioned in Heraclitus: blackening, whitening, yellowing, and reddening. This division of the process into 4 was called the quartering of the philosophy. Later, about the 15th or 16th century, the colors were reduced to 3, and the xanthosis, otherwise called the citrinitas, gradually fell into disuse or was but seldom mentioned. Instead, the viriditas sometimes appears after the melanosis or nigredo in exceptional cases, though it was never generally recognized. Whereas the original tetrameria corresponded exactly to the quaternity of elements, it was now frequently stressed that although there were 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and air, and 4 qualities, hot, cold, dry, and moist, there were only 3 colors, black, white, and red. Since the process never led to the desired goal and since the individual parts of it were never carried out in any standardized manner, the change in the classification of its stages cannot be due to extraneous reasons but has more to do with the symbolical significance of the quaternity and the trinity. In other words, it is due to inner psychological reasons. The nigredo or blackness is the initial state, either present from the beginning as a quality of the prima materia, the chaos or massa confusa, or else produced by the separation, separatio, divisio, putrefactio, of the elements. If the separated condition is assumed at the start, as sometimes happens, then a union of opposites is performed under the likeness of a union of male and female, called the conjugum, matrimonium, conjunctio, coitus, followed by the death of the product of the union, mortificatio, calcinatio, putrefactio, and a corresponding nigredo. From this the washing, ablutio, Baptisma either leads direct to the whitening, albedo, or else the soul, anima, released at the death is reunited with the dead body and brings about its resurrection, or again the many colors, or peacock's tail, lead to the one white color that contains all colors. At this point the first main goal of the process is reached, namely the albedo, tinctura alba, terra alba foliata, lapis albus, etc., highly prized by many alchemists as if it were the ultimate goal. It is the silver or moon condition, which still has to be raised to the sun condition. The albedo is, so to speak, the daybreak, but not till the rubedo is at sunrise. The transition to the rubedo is formed by the citrinitas, though this, as we have said, was omitted later. The rubedo then follows direct from the albedo as the result of raising the heat of the fire to its highest intensity. The red and the white are king queen, who may also celebrate their chemical wedding at this stage. Conceptions and symbols of the goal. The arrangement of the stages in individual authors depends primarily on their conception of the goal. Sometimes this is the white or red tincture, aqua permanens, sometimes the philosopher's stone, which, as hermaphrodite, contains both, or again it is the panacea elixir vitae, philosophical gold, golden glass, malleable glass. The conceptions of the goal are as vague and various as the individual processes. The lapis philosophorum, for instance, is often the prima materia, or the means of producing the gold, or again it is an altogether mystical being that is sometimes called Deus terrestris, Salvator, or Filius macrocosmi, a figure we can only compare with the Gnostic Anthropos, the divine original man. Besides the idea of the prima materia, that of water and that of fire play an important part. Although these two elements are antagonistic and even constitute a typical pair of opposites, they are yet one and the same according to the testimony of the authors. Like the prima materia, the water has 1,000 names. It is even said to be the original material of the stone. In spite of this, we are on the other hand assured that the water is extracted from the stone or prima materia as its life-giving soul, anima. This perplexity comes out very clearly in the following passage from the 8th Exercitatio in Turbum. Many dispute in long controversies whether the stone, under different names, consists of several substances, or of two, or only of one. But this philosopher and Benellis say that the whole work, and the substance of the whole work are nothing but the water, and that the treatment, regimen, of the same also takes place in nothing but the water. And there is in fact one substance in which everything is contained, and that is the sulfur philosophorum, which is water and soul, oil, mercurius and soul, the fire of nature, the eagle, the lacrima, the first goal of the wise, the materia prima of the perfect body. And by whatever names the philosophers have called their stone, they always mean and refer to this one substance, to the water from which everything originates, and in which everything is contained, which rules everything, in which errors are made and in which the error is itself corrected. I call it philosophical water, not ordinary water but aqua mercurialis, whether it be simple or composite. For both are the philosophical water, although the vulgar mercury is different from the philosophical. That water is simple and unmixed. This water is composed of two substances, namely of our mineral and of simple water. These composite waters form the philosophical mercurius, from which it must be assumed that the substance, or the prima materia itself, consists of composite water. Some alchemists put 3 together, others only 2. For myself 2 species are sufficient. Male and female are brother and sister. But they also call the simple water poison, quicksilver, argentum vivum, camber, aqua permanens, gum, vinegar, urine, seawater, dragon, and serpent. This account makes one thing very evident. The philosophical water is the stone or the prima materia itself, but at the same time, it is also its solvent, as is proved by the prescription immediately following. Grind the stone to a very fine powder and put it into the sharpest celestial. It can also be shown that fire played the same role as water. Another, no less important, idea is that of the hermetic vessel, typified by the retorts or melting furnaces that contain the substances to be transformed. Although an instrument, it nevertheless has peculiar connections with the prima materia as well as with the lapis, so it is no mere piece of apparatus. For the alchemist the vessel is something truly marvelous, a vast mirabile. Maria Prophetessa says that the whole secret lies in knowing about the hermetic vessel. Unum estate vas vessel is emphasized again and again. It must be completely round, in imitation of the spherical cosmos, so that the influence of the stars may contribute to the success of the operation. It is a kind of matrix or uterus from which the filius philosophorum, the miraculous stone, is to be born. Hence it is required that the vessel be not only round but egg-shaped. One naturally thinks of this vessel as a sort of retort or flask, but one soon learns that this is an inadequate conception, since the vessel is more a mystical idea, a true symbol like all the central ideas of alchemy. Thus we hear that the vas is the water or aqua permanens, which is none other than the mercurius of the philosophers. But not only is it the water, it is also its opposite, fire. I will not enter further into all the innumerable synonyms for the vessel. The few I have mentioned will suffice to demonstrate its undoubted symbolical significance. As to the course of the process as a whole, the authors are vague and contradictory. Many content themselves with a few summary hints, others make an elaborate list of the various operations. Thus in 1576, Josephus Quercetinus, alchemist, physician, and diplomat, who in France and French Switzerland played a somewhat similar role to that of Paracelsus, established a sequence of 12 operations as follows: calcinatio, solutio, elementorum, separatio, conjunctio, putrefactio, coagulatio, sebatio, sublimatio, fermentatio, exaltatio, augmentatio, proectio. Every single one of these terms has more than one meaning. We need only look up the explanations in Ruhlen's lexicon to get a more than adequate idea of this. It is therefore pointless to go further into the variations of the alchemical procedure in the present context. Such is, superficially and in the roughest outline, the framework of alchemy is known to us all. From the point of view of our modern knowledge of chemistry, it tells us little or nothing, and if we turn to the texts and the hundreds and hundreds of procedures and recipes left behind by the Middle Ages and Antiquity, we shall find relatively few among them with any recognizable meaning for the chemist. He would probably find most of them nonsensical, and furthermore it is certain, beyond all doubt, that no real tincture or artificial gold was ever produced during the many centuries of earnest endeavor. What then, we may fairly ask, induced the old alchemists to go on laboring, or, as they said, operating, so steadfastly, and to write all those treatises on the divine art if their whole undertaking was so portentously futile? To do them justice, we must add that all knowledge of the nature of chemistry and its limitations was still completely closed to them, so that they were as much entitled to hope as those who dreamed of flying and whose successors made the dream come true after all. Nor should we underestimate the sense of satisfaction born of the enterprise, the excitement of the adventure, of the seeking and the finding. This always lasts as long as the methods employed seem sensible. There was nothing at that time to convince the alchemist of the senselessness of his chemical operations. What is more, he could look back on a long tradition which contained not a few testimonies of such as had achieved the marvelous result. Finally, the matter was not entirely without promise, since a number of useful discoveries did occasionally emerge as byproducts of his labors in the laboratory. As the forerunner of chemistry, alchemy had a sufficient reason. Hence, even if alchemy had consisted in, if you like, an unending series of futile and barren chemical experiments, it would be no more astonishing than the venturesome endeavors of medieval medicine and pharmacology.